if we're talking about anything, friendship, if we're talking about anything in terms of a care for the poor or racial reconciliation, I tell people it's simple because all you're doing is loving someone. It's simple. It just costs you your life.
That challenging statement today, the voice of Scott Roley, our guest here on First Person. I'm Wayne Shepherd. Welcome to this week's program. I'll introduce Scott to you in just a moment, but first, let me point you to our website for more information about First Person and our weekly guests. We can be found online at firstpersoninterview.com. More information about today's guest and topic, a schedule of upcoming programs, and an audio archive of past programs is all found online at firstpersoninterview.com. You may have heard Scott Roley previously on this program as he joined his friend Michael Card, and they talked about biblical friendship. That's one of the programs in our audio archive. Well, Scott is back today, this time to talk with me about his calling to serve people through what he calls the Franklin Table. Scott and his family live in a neighborhood within Franklin, Tennessee, known as Hard Bargain, a place, as the name suggests, where life often can be hard. As we talk today, you'll hear Scott mention Hard Bargain, as well as his close friend, the late Pastor Denny Denson, who mentored Scott in what it means to be the hands and feet of Christ in a community of need, in part through a group of men called the Empty Hands Fellowship. Scott and I sat down to talk in Michael Card's Mole-In studio near Franklin. Well, Scott, it's great to catch up with you again. We talked a few months ago, but it's always nice to be with you, especially at Mike Card's place here at Mole-In.
We always love coming up here and talking, and for years and years we've done this, and it's always a joy.
It's time to go one-on-one with you today and find out what God is doing in your life. You left the pastorate after how many years?
I was 22 years at Christ Community Church. I left in August of 2011, and it has really been a blessing because there are seasons in our lives, and my season was done as a pastor.
Mm-hmm. How did you know?
That's a great question. I think just like you know that you're called into it, I think you know when it's time to move on. Mm-hmm. You know, Michael and myself and several other families were the founding families of that church. So really for 25 years, we've been there, you know, every Sunday.
Yeah.
And that was also a part of it.
I think you're absolutely right, though, because I went through a season of change in my own life, and I knew before things happened around me that things were going to change. God communicated to me things were going to change. Yeah. I didn't know how it would play out. That's what happened to you, too.
Yeah, I
right?
actually was expecting to resign maybe 6 months after that August. But the way the ministry was beginning in the fall, it just made more sense to go ahead and resign then.
Okay, that's what you were called from.
Right.
What have you been called to?
Well, I'm so excited to be back in what I think my primary calling has always been, and that's the encouragement, you know, that goes with care for the poor, racial reconciliation. This goes all the way back to the history I have growing up in Washington, D.C. My dad was a well-connected lawyer there, where I got to hear the King's speech, the I Have a Dream speech, got to have lunch at John Kennedy's, at the President's, had dinner with Bobby Kennedy, those kinds of experiences that taught me with the Civil Rights Movement what it meant to say, I'm going to care for the poor, and that race relations need help, and I need to be someone who can, you know, be a part of that. So
take me back to that early awareness, though. How did that manifest itself, even before you became a pastor?
Yeah, I think providentially. I'm a 6th, 7th grader, junior higher. Kennedy's talking about don't ask the country what it does for you. You ask what you can do for the country. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was a very powerful idea.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and I can remember thinking, all right, I've got to grow up being a part of something that's an answer. Race relations were very quickly, with the King's speech, I really found myself wondering why we were so separated, even as a junior high school student. And from there, found myself, desiring to see change.
Scott, you were at the King's speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial.
I was there with my brother and my dad. My dad pulled me out of school and had me come over there. It was late in August in '63. It was hotter than Billy O. And they were all...
I couldn't ask what that is, so keep going.
It's a euphemism. There were 100,000 people, African-American people, in the city. And I can remember thinking, I think all these people are mad because there aren't any statues for black people. Everything's white. Of course, I was thinking marble at the time. But really, I was very much... becoming someone who recognized that we were separated.
So that was a rite of passage for you.
It was a rite of passage, no doubt.
That seminal moment for you.
No doubt. I didn't get the speech. I didn't get the importance. I don't think anybody there did, really. It wasn't called the I Have a Dream speech.
No.
That came later. But it was absolutely powerful to hear a man speak like a preacher who had, all of these people mesmerized. And yeah, it was a powerful moment.
All right, but you had to act on that at
Right.
some point. So
Right.
when did that awareness and call to action come?
Yeah, I think throughout my next 10 years as I grew into high school, grew into college, met my wife, Linda. She was very much a caregiver to, she worked with severely mentally impaired kids.
Are you a believer at this time?
I was. I turned, the Lord converted me at age 16, about 3 years after the King's speech. And, but I went for it. I mean, I realized Jesus was a Martin Luther King. I mean, Jesus was a John Kennedy. He was a better version of what I was actually looking for. And I do think that conversion then said to me, is the Bible about reconciliation? Absolutely. Is the Bible about care for the poor? Absolutely.
And when you put that against the backdrop of the times
Exactly.
as well, I mean, what's going on culturally is...
Right. Detroit has the worst race riot in history. We eventually end up in Nashville as songwriters trying to make our living here. And it became very clear the polarized South. We had a Southern subtle racism that was everywhere. Jim Crow law was still in effect, and we're talking about the mid-'70s. And
Well, if
it's
you're trying to fight against that, you're going against the grain.
Exactly. We were adopting. We were saying the way you enter into this is through incarnate lifestyle. If you're going to be willing to say something about children who are being aborted, for instance, you need to be willing to adopt babies from moms who are in trouble. So all of that sort of put your money where your mouth is got me, and I wanted to have integrity in it, and so we ended up living in a poor neighborhood.
Yeah, eventually moving into a place intentionally.
Exactly, and then Denny Denson, the ministries that came out of the work that we were doing there really was a relational. I mean, Mike and I have talked about this for 30 years. Our hope to build up here at Mole End, a retreat center where you could come and learn about Jesus. Well, that really didn't come together like we thought. But what did come together was our ministry among those that are in need in the city. And how interesting it was to see, almost a 180 in what we thought was going to happen.
Now, you didn't set all that aside to take on a pastorate.
I didn't set it aside, but I'll tell you this. I had more optimism about what that church would be like if I had an opportunity to set the theological thought life. I think Mike defined that one time for me, really helpful. And if you can set the thought life of the church, and if I were able to say to them, look, race relations should be first and foremost, that would have, there would be a following that would go that direction. Everyone's called to a different ministry and work. I just think mine was called to stay in the city, and we built a big building out in the suburbs. It was a large church, a lot of wonderful people. I still love the church. Sure. At the same time, I was called to the city, and I feel much more comfortable there.
So you're no longer a pastor,
right? Well, actually,
you're free.
It's interesting.
You're freed up to do.
Actually, I'm not serving in a church, but I'm still a reverend. I'm still a pastor. Yeah, well,
okay.
I'm still a member of the Nashville Presbytery.
Okay.
I'm a part of the Presbyterian Church in America.
But do you sense you've been freed up to
yes,
do what
I have
you
been.
really want to do?
Yes, I feel like this is my calling and that I'm free to do it. And so I set up a not-for-profit called the Franklin Table, which is a metaphor, but a real one that is it means that we're having table fellowship, that it's about incarnate relational development, but it's also reflective of the Lord's table, our communion with Him, that it's central, that the gospel's central to all that we do. Jesus is central to everything we do. And it is a supportive ministry. I basically work with existing not-for-profits, a school, a medical clinic, a housing initiative.
So it's not an end unto itself.
It's not an end unto itself.
It's an assisting
Exactly.
ministry. Yeah.
I connect. I like to think of myself as someone who initiates, but I also am a connector and a supporter.
Mm-hmm. Then give me an example of how you come alongside an already existing ministry that you want to help them and enhance what they do.
Right now we're building our 6th house in the Hard Bargain Mount Hope redevelopment, and I am up to my earlobes in helping us to find families.
Let's
and
mention
do work.
that Hard Bargain is where you live.
Correct.
First of all.
Correct.
But it is a poorer area of town.
Correct. So we have a jobs partnership that we're establishing with Franklin Community Church, which is a church headed up by a white pastor, but he's in cooperation with Green Street Church of God Sanctified, Ray McGuire, a black pastor. So it's a lot what Denny and I used to do in terms of his first missionary and then Christ Community. So it's still initiating and supporting those kind of things, as well as New Hope Academy, the school. We have an elementary school that serves the poor.
Let me take you back to how you build what you call affordable housing.
Correct.
You don't just give the houses away.
No, they cost anywhere from $85,000 to about $125,000.
But it's very difficult for families to get into a house.
Correct. I mean, the cheapest house in Williamson County, I mean, they start about $385,000. I mean, it's just ridiculous where this county is. So all of our workforce, whether they're teachers or police force, firemen, the kinds of people that serve the community, they have no way of actually getting into the community and living. So we build homes that are period sensitive to the 1930s and 40s, which are reflective of our great communities.
So they fit in.
They fit in.
They look normal. They don't look like brand spanking new.
And they are hand built. Every board sawn by hand. It doesn't come in on a truck. It's not prefab. It doesn't go up in a week. It takes several months to build them. They'll stay here for 100 years should the Lord tarry.
Who does the building?
We have a contractor. We actually raise the money to build the houses. It costs probably $150,000 to build a house that we sell for $110,000, something like that.
And you subsidize the rest.
We subsidize the rest, and they are able to afford a mortgage. We put them through classes. Our families go through classes. All of us are learning how you are to budget and to maintain, a good job and to be able to pay those bills and do it right. So we have an extensive program that people go through. I
know that's just one example, but there's a smile on your face if you talk about it.
Well, we talk about race relations. The Red Road, Charles Robinson, he went with me up to Chicago to do something with Michael Card not too far back, and it was just great to see Native American ministries and how we're supporting them. I just spoke Saturday morning at an Hispanic pastors conference. We had about 100 Hispanic pastors, all speaking Spanish. Obviously, me, the only Anglo. And quickly, it was just amazing to hear their stories of new arrivals, people who are illegal. What are we doing about all that stuff? Well, I love getting into that. That's something I couldn't do as a pastor.
And we'll hear more of the heart of Scott Roley as he reaches out to his community coming up today on First Person. Next time, we'll meet Marta Greenman, a woman who was sexually abused as a child but found healing in Christ.
And it was that darkest day that was the best day of my life. I cried out, and I'm like, Lord, I don't know why you would love me, but you say that you will. Take me, fix me, do whatever it takes. But I just can't do this anymore.
You'll hear the testimony of Marta Greenman next time on First Person. Talking with Scott Roley today with the Franklin Table in Franklin, Tennessee. We're at Michael Card's studio, the Mole End, and Mike has graciously allowed us to use the studio here today. I sense just a new energy in you, Scott, over what God has called you back into, really.
Yeah, that's great. I've told many people that although my hair still falls out, it isn't falling out as quickly. The nosebleeds have stopped. No, moving from the pastorate, and all kidding aside, moving from the pastorate into this new directorship has really given me a lot of life. And I'm being able to spend more time with Mike Card, which is really, a part of my calling. And I am more full of joy than ever. Mm-hmm.
Take me deeper into the community here and the work of the Franklin Table. Tell me about people that are helped and how they're helped.
Right. For instance, one story we talk about Big John. John Murphy is a patriarch of the neighborhood of Hard Bargain, been there forever. And last summer, his home burned. They had an electrical fire up in the attic, and as a result, burned the house to the ground. So the community rallied, and we began to share the story. He had done so much work, and he's in his late 70s. He'd done a lot of work for a lot of people in the city, and they all knew Big John. So we've rallied, and we're right in the middle of finishing the house that we've replaced his home with. And it is his home now. It is a Hard Bargain house. My role as a member of the Franklin Table is to continue to promote, to ask pastors to give, to get companies to give, get individuals to give. So rallying people that way, but also just the emotional support of the community as they look on Big John and come alongside him.
Yeah. Of course, you're well known in this community. You've had roots here for many, many years. So that opens doors.
Right.
But what about the presentation of the need? Are people receptive to that?
Absolutely. And I think people want to help, and they're looking for valid opportunities where they think they can see a difference. And let me tell you, building a house is a great visible demonstration of the gospel. It just is something all of us wish we had, our own place, a place to call home. And when you build a home, this is the key to Habitat for Humanity. And I was on their board for years, believe in them and love that ministry. At the same time, we're not doing what they do. We're actually building homes that will be around for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And but it's a similar kind of ministry.
What you're doing with the Franklin Table, would it work anywhere? Of course, it has to be adapted to the area and the needs of the area, but it can work, right?
Yeah, there's a ministry in New York City called Hope for New York. There are ministries all over the country where a city will have one sort of central place where all these ministries can find support. They can find a willing ear or someone who's going to promote and help them. And that's what I bring to it. It's something that we called Franklin Community Ministries 25 years ago. And as not-for-profits like New Hope Academy or Empty Hands Fellowship spun out of that, that actually became less and less viable. Well, because I was pastoring, there was no way to keep it going. Mm-hmm. And as it diminished, then I felt this void. And so what I've done in resigning and now coming into the Franklin Table, with the Franklin Table, I think it's a resurgence into that kind of work.
The people who receive the help, the encouragement, the step up, so to speak, how do they respond? I mean, do they? Well, you tell me. How do they respond?
It's everything from a gift certificate so someone can buy a turkey at Thanksgiving. One of my neighbors, I got 4 guys that are right next door to me who play poker all day. It's an attempt to move into their life, which they are very willing to accept me. I'm not a very good poker player, but being in their life incarnately, rather than just kind of bopping in and bopping out, mm-hmm. or making them feel shame because they don't have a job.
You're not seen as someone coming in from the outside offering help and assistance.
No, we've already had all those arguments.
You go on your way.
Yeah, they've already
yelled right there in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And they, when we moved in 15 years ago, they thought I was a cop because there's a lot of drugs sold in our neighborhood. So they thought I was a narc, a narcotics officer. And I said, of course, it's a lot worse than that. I'm a pastor. So that was we've already dealt with a lot of that. But
it took time.
It did take time. That's why I say to people, it's like if we're talking about anything, friendship, if we're talking about anything in terms of a care for the poor or racial reconciliation, I tell people it's simple because all you're doing is loving someone. It's simple. It just costs you your life, and that's the part people. That's when people walk away because they want to have people as friends who are very different than them, but they don't realize this is a lifelong experience.
Have you been spurned?
Sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, I've got a book called Hard Bargain. It's a beautiful place to live, and in that book I tell several stories where I've had almost fistfights or gotten very close to being in very difficult circumstances and being spurned and being called names, and it's not pretty. I don't think wherever the gospel goes, it's not pretty. It's messy. And race relations in the South are messy. Right now, they're still messy. So, yeah, there are people that don't understand. The guy lives across the street from me, Tootie Kelton. I don't think he'll ever hear this broadcast. But Tootie and I, and Denny used to get into it with Tootie nose to nose. But Tootie doesn't trust me. He never will trust me simply because I'm white. And that's
after all these years of living across the street from each other. He's just determined never to ever trust a white man. And let me tell you, he comes by that naturally. He had a lot of very bad things happen to him at the hands of what I would call white oppressive people. Where's this going? Where's the Franklin Table going? What would you like to see happen next?
Well, I'd love to eradicate poverty in Williamson County. How about that?
That's a pretty big goal.
Yeah, I just think it's okay to say I want a house for everybody that needs a house. I want a job for everybody who needs a job. I want food on the table for anyone who's hungry. I want the prisoners to be visited. I mean, these are the things that are a part of the call. I'm also not naive to think that actually can be done. He said the poor will always be among us. Mm-hmm. But he also said that there should be no poor among you, meaning here within the church, the
within
community.
Your reach, yeah.
Why can't, within reach, thank you. And that's that proximity to injustice that I think all of us are called to. We do it in very different ways. And so therefore I'm not defining what that proximity has to look like. But if you're not engaged at some level with people who are poor, then just go read the scriptures. Just pull out the word poor and do a word study on it, and it'll satisfy your realization that Jesus wants you among the poor.
I expect I know the answer you're going to give to this, Scott, but do you feel like in any way that you have given up anything to do what you do?
Not at all. No. In fact, it's like this surprise in the midst of our friendship when you realize the gift of self-sacrifice is best demonstrated by being a true friend. I think that's what working among the poor, orphan care, the kinds of things that James was bringing up. The real proof that you're loved by Jesus is that, wow, this is something I'm called to do that is a joy. This is abundant life, to let go of everything. I'm as big a materialist as I've ever been. It's just so much more fun now to say material things don't really matter. Huh. But that's not an understanding you can come by through the culture. That has to be a spiritual, that's discerned because Jesus is alive and well and he's working in Hard Bargain.
Are you open to sharing what you've learned with others who may want to contact you about
Absolutely.
that?
Oh,
you have a couple of books. I haven't mentioned the books. You mentioned one of them.
You're right. God's Neighborhood was an IVP book that was published by IVP back in the early 2000s, and then I have Hard Bargain, A Beautiful Place to Live, which has been done in the last 2 years. So
describe Hard Bargain. We mentioned it earlier, but just describe what the neighborhood is like.
Yeah, it's a community with about 600, 700 people in it. It's small.
It's a town within a town, kind of.
It's a town within a town. We're the last black-owned, African-American-owned community in Williamson County. I consider myself African because I have 2 African-American sons, so I consider myself African. Hope that's not offensive. But with that said, our minorities in Williamson County make up most of our poorest of citizens, and so it is 99% African-American. And it is a beautiful place to live. These are the best friends that I could have ever had and best neighbors I could have ever had. So
I know you do as God directs, but do you ever see yourself leaving Hard Bargain?
Only to be buried next to Bill Lane in Mount Hope Cemetery.
And that's only a block away,
it's
right?
Literally a block. I ride my bike by him every day. Hope this is not too weird. I talk to him.
Bill was
Bill.
He was your mentor along with our friend Mike Card. So.
Just the great Bill Lane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Scott, thanks. It is obvious that God has really touched you and given you that heart that now you're fully able to give back. So.
Well, it's great to see you again, Wayne. It reminds me of the old days and the better days that are coming. Yeah.
Scott and I talked about Franklin, Tennessee a lot today, but you can apply the lessons Scott has learned and put it into practice wherever you live. You don't have to look very far to find people whom we can serve and to whom we can show the love of Christ. For more about Scott and the Franklin Table, visit our website, firstpersoninterview.com. We've placed links there that will lead you to find out more. Again, go to firstpersoninterview.com. And if you'd like to go back into our archive to hear our recent program with Scott Roley and Michael Card, it's also found at firstpersoninterview.com when you click on the Listen button and scroll through the list of programs. And to interact with us on the things you hear on First Person, come to our Facebook page, facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. And here's what's coming up next week on our program. We'll talk with a woman who was sexually abused as a child, but found healing in Jesus Christ. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Thanks for listening to First Person.